Hi everyone! I hope you're all having a great week. I have a bit of cobalt teal light left on my palette here, and so I'm gonna mix it with a bit of light red to create a bit of a grayish blue. And I'm just going to experiment. I'm not really sure what it is I'm gonna create today, but I have that color and a couple of other colors. One is sepia and the other is French ochre, and I want to play with them and see what I can come up with. I really love to mix this color. It's one of my favorites, and I've used it in many of my paintings as a background color. And it's often a color I'll mix when I'm creating a little landscape, whether it be an abstract landscape or something a little bit more representational. So I'm kind of thinking maybe I'll go landscape. Maybe I'll create a little whimsical landscape. I feel like I haven't done a whimsical landscape in a little bit or a little while, and maybe it'd be fun for me to do that today. This color here that I've just picked up is another color that I got from Cormier Pigments. It's called French Ochre, and it's the first time I'm actually using it. I love Cormier paints. They're generally pretty creamy, and I love how well they get applied on the paper. This color looks really nice against that bluish gray that's on top, and so I really like that. And this color I'm applying now is called Sepia, and it's a very rich dark brown, I guess, that I'm playing with for the first time. I guess when I was looking at the colors on my palette, I saw these two colors, and I had both my French ochre and my sepia pans next to my star gold, and the three of them just sitting there without even putting them on paper. They looked so good together. So I thought, okay, these two colors definitely need to come on that paper because they're gonna look really nice with my star gold, which I want to play with today. And I wasn't really sure what to pair them with, and then I had that color left on my palette, so I just went with that. And I felt like at first maybe I needed to brighten up the top part of the painting, and so I added a little bit of intense blue to what will probably end up being a sky, because I think I am going to create a whimsical little landscape. But then I was like, maybe it's a little bit too intense, and maybe it was nicer, or I liked it better before I added that intense blue. But watercolors always dry lighter than when they're first applied, so I'll just wait and see what happens after it dries, and I'll take it from there. I recently also purchased a quinacridone burnt orange that I really like, and I think it'll play really well with that French ochre. So I've decided to add a little bit on top, and one of the reasons I like to add it is sometimes colors, always watercolors, when they dry, they become more muted, but certain colors tend to keep their brightness, and I find that that quinacridone burnt orange is one of those colors that will sort of help to keep that top part of the painting a little bit warmer and brighter maybe. So that's why I decided to add it. Was it necessary? Maybe not, but I'm experimenting and I paint intuitively, so I'm kind of just going with the flow and adding things as I'm going along. I also reached into my pen and decided to add some Van Dyke Brown to that bottom section. That sepia is really nice, but it's a little bit darker, almost like leaning towards black, and I want it to warm it up a little bit, so that's why I decided to add the Van Dyke Brown. And then I also reached into my pan and added some green gold on the bottom because, again, I like bright colors, My green gold, my nickel azo yellow, those are always colors that I can count on to remain really bright once I've added them and the paper is dry. So that's sort of the logic. It kind of looks a little bit messy and not so great right now, but I'm not worried about it. I know as I'm going along that it's going to keep changing. After letting the first layer dry, I usually like to come back in with my colors to intensify them. And so I added some French ochre back to my painting, and then I decided to add a little bit more of that quinacridone burnt orange, which as you can see is very bright. I really love it. So I am liking that. I'm going to use a little bit of water to maybe move some of that paint around and help get rid of that really hard edge. But yeah, I'm liking those colors. The French ochre is very nice, but applied as a second layer, it almost looked a little bit more yellow, I think, than I actually wanted it. Or I don't know. I just kind of felt like I needed to add that burnt orange to it. And that's kind of how I do it, you know. I just go along and I'm like, oh, let's try this, let's try that. It's really a lot about experimenting. And I hope that when you're painting that you can try to experiment as well, and that you don't feel like you have to do things exactly the way I'm doing them, because what I'm doing is very much experimenting. I'm playing, I'm trying to see what I like and what maybe I don't like quite as much. And it's important for you to try and do that as well, so that you can figure out the things that are pleasing to your eyes. There's so many discoveries to be made when we're playing and experimenting with our paints. And that's how we come to figure out what colors please us the most, how we love to move the paint on our paper, and what color combinations we like to put together, and what color combinations we don't like to put together. So please try to experiment and play with your art supplies. All this being said, another great way to learn how to create different effects or to learn different techniques is to try and replicate what you see someone else doing. A lot of artists do this, and there's no problem with doing this. However, if you're trying to replicate someone else's work for purposes other than for learning or for creating art for your own enjoyment, then there are simple guidelines that are good to follow. In my video description below, I've also included an article that I found online with some really good advice on this topic. I'd like you to read the article in its entirety and let me know what you think about what's written in that article. The article is called Inspiration versus Imitation: How to Copy as an Artist, and was written on a website called might-could.com by a lady whose name is Christine. I find the article to be very comprehensive and helpful. It tells us when copying artwork can be useful and help us learn and develop as artists. Plus, it describes when copying becomes more akin to plagiarism. I'm bringing up this discussion today not because I feel like I've been plagiarized or that my artwork has been plagiarized, but it is a question I frequently get either in private or in some of my comments, and I felt that it was important for us to get more information on the topic and to discuss it as a community. So I'm really glad people have the courage to ask me these tough questions, because I think it's very important for us as artists and developing artists to be able to have frank discussions on what is helping us in our development as artists and what can also be very detrimental to us as we develop and grow as artists. When it comes to creativity, I will often say I don't really like to adhere to too many fixed rules. For me, this is not so much a rule as it is a way of working ethically as an artist. Every week I have a number of you telling me that you have been painting alongside with me and creating your own artwork inspired by the artwork I create here on my YouTube channel. And I absolutely love this. I love knowing that you're out there painting with me, so to speak, and that you are feeling inspired to paint by watching my videos. Some of you will even post the pictures of your paintings on Instagram and tag me so that I have a chance to see them. By tagging me on their posts, they're giving me credit for the inspiration for their painting. And this, to me, very much adheres to those ethical guidelines that we're talking about. It's really so much fun for me to be able to connect with you all in this way, and I really want to encourage you to keep doing it. I won't lie, this feels a little bit like an awkward topic for discussion, even for me. And at the same time, I feel that it's an important discussion to have, because I want us all to be the very best artists that we can be. And so I share this with you all with an open heart full of love. I really do sincerely hope you'll make time to read the article and share your thoughts with me in my comment section down below. I'm feeling satisfied with the background I've created, so I'm gonna come in with my fountain pen at this point, and I'm gonna start to delineate some of the marks that I see in my painting, and this is gonna help me build on a composition. I love to work this way. This is a very intuitive way for me to work. I just look at what's there on the paper that was created by the way I moved my brush and by the water and the paint as it was being applied. And so it's kind of serving as a bit of a guide. And I'm using this to help create my painting. So layer by layer, bit by bit, this painting is going to come to life. I don't try to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, when I'm painting or creating a new painting. I generally like to work using similar elements to other elements I've used in some of my previous paintings, which in turn helps me create a little collection of paintings as I'm going along. Plus, it keeps it very simple for me. I love to work with simple marks, lines, vertical lines, horizontal lines, dots, circles. These are elements that will often show up in my paintings. And the reason they do is because these are marks I really enjoy creating, and they're very simple and easy to do. My painting process, I always thrive for it to be a relaxing process and a process that helps me focus on what I'm doing, but not so intensely that I start to analyze what it is I'm doing. So by creating very simple marks, repetitive marks, I can stay in that flow. I can focus on what I'm doing, but I don't get too caught up in my mind. And that makes my process more relaxing. So it's funny, I threw together a bunch of colors that I liked, and I created this background. I won't lie, I'm not, crazy about this background. I don't think it's the nicest background I've ever created, but there are some really interesting elements to it. And by using this dark ink, this black ink, and my fountain pen, I'm gonna help make it even more interesting by adding details like I'm doing right now. And you'll see, or at least I hope you'll see, and I saw that in the end, I actually ended up really loving the little painting I created, and it was created using a background that I wasn't so sure I was all that crazy about. So it's, I guess, an interesting lesson that almost anything can be saved when we're painting, when we're drawing. That's one of the funnest things about the creative process. You can really transform just about anything into something you like. But the important thing is you need to stay at it. You need to keep working on it. You can't just walk away from it and give up, because then it'll always be that background that you didn't like. If you actually keep at it, keep working on it, give yourself a chance to make it something different, then you can actually see how it transforms into something you like way better. And in the process, you also develop a way of working through these little quote unquote problems. So you know that the next time this happens, there's a way to work through it. So earlier I drew this line on top that turned into like a really pointed shape, and it could have turned into a mountain of some kind, but I decided that that's not really where I want it to go. I want my landscape to be a little bit more whimsical than that. I don't want it to be representational per se. It's more abstract and whimsical, and I want it to be fun. And so I decided that since that orangey terracotta color is in this area, for me it's very reminiscent of desert rock. And so I thought I'm gonna add some more rocks and just keep going with that for a bit. And like I said before, one decision leads to the next. There are no set ideas that are pre-planned, I guess. It's really about looking at what's in that background and seeing the different shapes, seeing how the colors, when they're combined together, they are interesting, and how I can transform it into something even more interesting. A great way to create harmony in any painting or in any artwork is to repeat some elements that you've created in one part of your artwork somewhere else. And so I had created some stippling just above that section of green on the bottom, and I decided that I wanted to add a little bit more of it again, because this will help to create some harmony in my painting. And I've said it before, I really love stippling. It's very, very easy to do, and it can add so much visual interest with just something as simple as a dot. Well, not just a dot, many dots. But yeah, it's just so easy and simple to do, and it looks really cool. So why not repeat it? And again, by doing so, you'll create a little bit more harmony in your painting. Once I was done adding my stippling, I felt really compelled to add a bigger shape on the right hand side of my painting, only because I was feeling like everything was a little bit too low still, and I wasn't quite ready to move into the upper part of the sky, or I didn't want a lot of that orangey terracotta color to be in what I consider my abstract sky. And so I needed to create some other elements to sort of keep moving the eye up. I won't mind leaving some of those colors blending into the sky, but I don't want a big area of it. So I felt like I needed to do a little something more, and so that's why I decided to add this bigger shape and then those smaller shapes underneath it, because I thought it would help to balance things out a little bit more and help move the eye from the bottom to the top of the painting a little bit more, not fluidly, but with better flow, I guess. So just creating these small elements, I mean these bigger elements in some ways, helps to create more visual interest and balance, and it just makes everything look better. That's how I'm feeling. Maybe in your mind, maybe you're looking at it going, why she do that? And that's okay. We're all gonna look at things differently. But for me, I needed to do that. So that's the thing, is if I feel compelled or called to do something, I listen to that call, I answer that call, and I go ahead and do it. Sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes I listen to that call, I try something, and whether it's because I couldn't quite translate it to paper the way I would have liked it to show up on paper, or just because once I actually saw it on paper, it didn't really speak to me quite as much as it did instinctively, I still try it. Because as I'm trying these things, as I'm experimenting, I am learning, I'm continuing to learn about my likes and my dislikes in my painting process. And that's a very important part for me anyway, of developing my own style and developing my skills and eye for what I like. Having moved the quote-unquote land section of my painting up a little bit more, I'm now feeling compelled and ready to start adding a little some more elements that draw the eye a little bit up more. And so I'm just going to create these very simple foliage-like shapes. Do they represent a specific type of foliage that I've ever really seen in nature? Probably not. Maybe, but I can't say I've seen anything like that really distinctly out in nature. But they're just very simple, foliage-like, abstract, whimsical. Maybe whimsical is the better word. And they're just going to help to draw the eye upwards. And so I'll add a few of them in here and there in the painting just to keep moving the eye up. In a lot of my quote-unquote abstract whimsical landscapes, I often will add the sun because I love the celestial bodies and I love the sun and the moon and I love to play with them. But I wasn't really feeling called to add a sun in this painting. I just wanted to do something different and whimsical, and so that's why I'm creating these very simple plant-like shapes, and it's going to help to draw the eye up. It's keeping me focused on doing something that's not too challenging and helping me stay in the present moment where I feel more relaxed and at ease with my process. Earlier, I was talking about how we are often influenced or inspired by looking at other people's artwork, and how that can be a great source of learning and a way for us to explore developing our skills and learning what kind of marks we like to make. And I have a lot of interest, I guess, in First Nations artwork. I find it very pretty, and so it might be that when I'm creating certain marks, that my marks might be influenced by some of the artwork I have seen in the past, and that's not unusual. You'll see that other artists will also have similar influences, and there's nothing wrong with being influenced by artwork that we see, because the things that really appeal to us visually are often the things we want to try and find our own way of creating. So some of the marks that you're seeing on my painting, I'm sure other artists have probably used similar marks. Did they come out exactly the same as mine? Probably not, because I have my own spin on things. But that was such a big part of my learning experience as an artist. The very first time I picked up my paint brushes as an adult and tried to paint, because I had always mainly been someone who sketched. I did a lot of charcoal sketches when I was younger, and that was sort of mostly what I did. It was a very rare thing that I actually ever worked with color, which is interesting because I love color so much. But when I first started to learn how to paint, I didn't have the money to take classes, and I really didn't know what to do, so I just bought some very basic paints and some very basic canvases and brushes. And I think I had an old calendar of a variety of different artwork. So every month there was a different painting, and there were a few paintings in that calendar that I really liked. And so I didn't know how to paint, so I wanted to try and learn, but I had to start somewhere, and I couldn't afford classes. So I looked at these paintings, and I basically tried to recreate them as best I could, just to do sort of a study on how the artist who had created these specific paintings had gone about creating them. I don't think I was working necessarily with the same mediums. I was probably working with acrylic paints at the time. And I didn't really have any technique per se, because I was just learning. But it was such a wonderful way for me to learn, because I learned a ton about mixing colors and trying to get colors the exact same shade as the color I was seeing on the picture. And I really had a lot of fun. And so, yeah, I cannot stress enough how important it is not just to experiment and play, but also to see what kind of artwork that's out there that appeals to you, and maybe challenge yourself to try and create that artwork. You know, some of these paintings that I created when I first started painting, I still have to this day, and then others I've just put gesso all over the top of it, and I've created something completely different, because now I've been painting for years and I feel like I have developed my own style, and I have other things that I'm interested in doing. So I tend to push myself now, but I do still have some of these little paintings that I created, and I like looking at them because it shows me how much I've developed as an artist and how I've changed and gotten more skilled, I guess. However, there's a process for each and every one of us. And we can't be looking at someone who's been creating for many, many years and put the pressure on ourselves to create exactly the same way that person who's been painting for many, many years, because it's just not realistic. And the only thing we're going to do is end up getting frustrated and disappointed, and it wouldn't be surprising if we also end up giving up because the expectations are not realistic. So it's important for us to be compassionate with ourselves, to not compare ourselves to other people. I think I read somewhere, I think it was probably in a Brene Brown book, comparison is the thief of joy. And that is so true. When we compare our own work to the work of other people, not knowing their experience and how long they've been painting and their background, etc., then we do ourselves a disservice. So it's really important to give ourselves credit for what we can do, to offer ourselves compassion when we have challenges, but to keep moving forward and to keep striving to learn to develop our skills. And we can do that only by actually painting or doing what we love to do. I'm feeling really happy at this point with the elements I've been able to add using my fountain pen. And now I'm feeling ready to start adding some white elements. So adding contrast in a different way by adding some white. Normally, I would prefer to work with my Signa pen on watercolor paper, but just a few weeks ago I used this Posca marker on another watercolor painting, and I sort of decided that this was going to be my dedicated watercolor paint pen, and so I'm using it to create these dots. Posca pens have a felt tip, and so watercolor paper being a little bit rough, sometimes it can be very hard on felt tips, so I don't typically prefer to work on watercolor paper with these types of pens and markers, but this is a pen that I specifically dedicated to it, so I'm going to keep using it. I don't want the ink or the tip to dry out on me and then it become unusable, so I'm going to keep using it while I can. And I'm just going in right now in what's considered the sky portion of my painting, and I'm adding little dotted circles. What can I say they represent? Maybe they could represent, dandelions when they dry out, or when they're not when they're dried out, but when they go into their seeding phase, they get these little white puffy balls. Maybe these little white round forms that I'm creating on my painting right now could represent that. But they don't necessarily need to represent anything. Again, this is a whimsical little painting. It's abstract. Everything that's on here doesn't have to look like anything specific. So I'm just following my gut. My gut was telling me I wanted to add some white. At first I was trying to swirl the dots, and they looked okay, but they weren't looking as swirly as they would have looked if I had just drawn a swirl. But if I did that with my Posca pen, it would probably really wreak havoc on the felt tip, and I don't want to do that because I do want to be able to use this marker even if I'm dedicating it to my watercolors. I still want to be able to use it for quite some time, and if I really, ruin the tip too much, then it won't be a good pen for me to use to create details. The ink will kind of go where it wants to go following the ruined tip. So I don't know if that makes sense. Anyway, So I'm just dotting the white on. I'm going to dot a little bit more of this in the top portion of my sky, and then I'm going to start to move some of that white down to create a little bit more light contrast on the bottom portion of my painting as well. If I could put the unfinished background, or the background after it had finished drying, before I started adding the black elements and the white elements to the painting, and set it next to it right now so that we could compare how different it looks. I mean, of course it's going to look different. I added stuff to it. But it's not just that I added stuff to it. It's just adding two very simple things to it. Black and white, and it made a huge difference in what I'm seeing. So it doesn't ever really need to be complicated, really. Creating is, in fact, at its core, can be quite simple. It doesn't, anyway, I'm just kind of excited. I'm looking at this painting coming to life as I'm adding just these little white dots. And that's all I'm doing, is creating these little white dots. And it's really helping to transform that bottom portion of the painting. And I find it pretty exciting. I guess I get excited for not very much. Speaking of getting excited, it's time for some star gold. Oh, I love it so much. And really, on this painting in particular, I couldn't wait to do it. Like I said, before I even applied any paint at all, I was just looking at the paints in my little pans, and they were all next to each other, and I was like, wow, those colors look so nice together. That I knew as soon as I added that star gold to any of these colors that it was going to look really nice. And it's really, in this case, I'm applying it over the sepia section. It's really making that sepia look even better. I mean, sepia is not an exciting color. Let's, not kid ourselves. But if you add star gold to your sepia, something magical might happen. It is, astonishing for me anyway. Like when I'm applying the paint, and I'm like a kid in a candy store. No, wait, scratch that. I'm like a kid in a paint store. No, even better. I'm a kid painting. I'm painting. Here I am creating and having so much fun doing it. And I hope that when you are painting, that you can get just as excited as I'm getting about what you're creating. What you're creating is coming from your hands. You're making all of this happen, and you're combining all these colors to create these little magical paintings that will make other people smile. And there's something pretty special about that. So of course, because I love my star gold so much, I need to spread a little bit of that star gold love all over my painting. I always tried not to exaggerate, but I do think that adding some elements here and there all over will be magical in this painting, because all of those colors, aside from each other, would look really nice with star gold. But when you combine them and then you add star gold on top, well, it's, I love it. All right, so I pulled out my black fountain pen again, and I have to add another one of those little foliage things on the left side because it didn't feel quite balanced enough for me. And yeah, it's just one tiny thing, but for whatever reason it wasn't sitting well with my eyes, so I decided to add just this little bit of black on the left side, and once I'm done adding it, I think I'm ready to call my painting done. I had a ton of fun creating this little whimsical landscape, and I hope it was just as enjoyable for you to watch me in my creative process. I feel so thankful and appreciative that you choose to join me on this creative journey every week. Thank you for making the time to watch. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating!